Deconstruction. Deconstruction, Adoniram, Judson, the movie Smallfoot, and Jesus. They're all tied together, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit today in this video. So this this idea of deconstruction, it's a hot topic right now. It's a buzzword. There are a lot of people going through this process of deconstruction. So I just want to explain a little bit what it means, and then I just want to also say something about this before I talk too much about deconstruction, because I don't want to unnecessarily say something that's hurtful to somebody who's going through a legitimate process of deconstruction. So just bear with me. But first off, if you're not familiar with the term deconstruction, it is the opposite of construction. So to construct something means to put it together, to build it. To deconstruct is the opposite, is to take it apart. And so deconstruction, in reference to our faith or what it means to be a Christian, is to take apart the beliefs that we maybe once held dear. It's to deconstruct. It's to question them and say, I don't know that I believe this anymore, and to take it apart. So before going any further, I just want to say that there's a couple different things here. In reference to deconstruction. For some, deconstruction means to deconstruct their idea of church, the institution of the church. And so people are walking away from the institution of the church, or the way church has kind of always been done, here in the West at least, but they still have an authentic, legitimate faith in Jesus. And sometimes people that are going through that process are going through because of some really serious hurt they've experienced in the church, some abuses of authority, some just horrible things. There's tons of examples I could give of horrible things that have happened in the church and in Jesus' name. And some people are saying, I want nothing to do with that, but I still have an authentic faith in Jesus. And then there's another kind of process of deconstruction where people just actually take apart their faith. So people who used to be believers and followers of Jesus are deconstructing their faith or their once dearly held beliefs. And they're saying, I no longer believe those things. I no longer believe that the scriptures teach the truth. I no longer believe Jesus is actually God in the flesh, that he rose again, that he was born of a virgin. So there's that process. And so, if you're watching this and you're going through that process, or you've been hurt by the church, or you're wrestling through some things, you may feel like I'm not representing your story well. And this video, I'm not trying to tell you what to do or to tell you what to believe or to tell you that, deconstruction is just bad. The reason I'm doing this video is because I do believe there is a different way. And it does grieve my heart to see so many people turning from the church and turning from their faith. And as I said, I believe that there is a different way. And so you might be thinking now at this point, well, how does this have anything to do with Adoniram, Judson, and the movie Smallfoot, and Jesus? We'll get there. So Adoniram Judson, he's for quite a few years, he's been one of my favorite missionaries. I'm currently going through the process of earning my MDiv through Wesley Seminary. And one of the projects I had to do for one of my classes was to do some research on a missionary that had been really impactful to me. And so I chose Adoniram Judson. And Judson, as I did some study, and I've studied Adoniram Judson sometimes, over the years, like I've read up on him and read his story, and I've always been really impacted, and I'll share why. But in this most recent study, this fall, I actually learned that Adoniram Judson went through a process of deconstruction. And I had known about his rejection of the faith and all that stuff, but this time, because deconstruction is such a buzzword right now, such a hot topic, as I was studying Adoniram Judson's life, I was hearing a lot of the same language, and a lot of the same things were going on amongst Adoniram Judson and his friends, his young friends who grew up in the faith, as what's happening today. And I'm like reading this and I'm thinking, this is 200 years ago, and I was thinking of that verse in Ecclesiastes where it says there's nothing new under the sun. The things that have been happening that happened 2 years ago happen today. We have maybe new words and ways of describing them, but the same kind of things, the same kind of struggles have been going on ever since humanity has been around. And so a little bit about Adoniram Judson. He was born in 1788. That's late 18th century, but 1700s. The way we say that always messes me up. But so late 18th century. This guy was a child prodigy. He actually learned to read at 3 years old. And then not long after that, he mastered Greek and Latin. Brilliant guy. His dad was a Congregationalist minister. His mom was a Christian activist. He was the type of guy that could have done anything. He could have went on to become the president of the United States or do something really, really great for his country. Just a really, really brilliant guy. And when it came time for him to go to university, he wanted to go to Harvard, but his dad felt like Harvard was too liberal. So he sent him to Rhode Island University, which is now Brown's University. And but his dad's plan backfired. The reason he sent him there is because he wanted him to get a good Christian education and to maintain his Christian values and all those things. But when he went to this university, he met a group of young guys his age. They were a couple years older than him. They had been there first. And one of the main guys from that group, his name was Jacob Eames. And so super well-educated. He was cultured. He was culturally elite, brilliant guy. And him and his group of friends had accepted this belief system called deism. And so deism is basically the belief that there is a supernatural being, a divine being, if you will, who created this world, this universe, and then just kind of stood back and let it exist and let it operate on its own. And so they had embraced this idea that, yeah, there is like a being that created this space we live in, but you can't know him. He's not personal. And so just go live your life. Just do whatever you want. You do you. They probably didn't say you do you, but you get the idea. That was kind of the belief system of deism. And so Judson bought right into this with his friend. And so, they all hung out, became super good friends, and they deconstructed the faith that they had grown up in. A lot of them had grown up in Christian homes with Christian values, and they walked away from it. They said, we no longer need that. It's old, it's dated. We've moved on. We're embracing, a different logic or, way of thinking. And so they moved on from that. And Judson, after university, he joined a traveling theater group. And one night I think he was leaving New York. It was just outside of New York. He went to an inn, and he was exhausted. He wasn't going to make it to his home. And I think he was from Boston, New England area somewhere. And so he knew he wasn't going to make it. So he stops at this inn, and he goes to the innkeeper and he says, hey, I need a place to stay. And the innkeeper's like, you know what? I don't have anything for you. He said, I've got one room, but I wouldn't give it to you because it's next to a room where there's a man dying, and he's moaning and groaning, and it's awful. And Judson was exhausted, and he was like, just give me the room. I don't care. I'll listen to the guy moan and groan all night. So he takes the room, and sure enough, there's a guy in the next room, and he's just in obvious pain, and he's experiencing the last minutes of his life. And so Judson wakes up in the morning, and he's going to leave, and he's talking to the innkeeper, and he asks about the guy, and the innkeeper says, yeah, he died. And Judson said, well, what was his name? And the innkeeper said his name was Jacob Eames. And Judson was just floored, because this was the same Jacob Eames who had led him into deism, away from his Christian faith, away from his Christian values. And it shook him. Judson was rocked. He said he couldn't stop thinking about eternity and heaven and hell and his Christian values and the reality of Jesus and Jesus' claims and who Jesus says he is. And he was thinking about his really good friend who was also brilliant and could have done anything, could have, gone on to do incredible and great things and left a big legacy, but he was just gone in a moment. His life was over. And Judson was just shook with the reality of life and death and how sudden it can end. And so that actually led to Judson doubting his doubts. He began to doubt the doubts that led him away from Christianity. And then he enrolled in a seminary program as a non-Christian. So understand, you try to figure that one out. He goes to seminary, he's not a Christian yet. And while he's there, he has an encounter with God, where God just revealed himself to Judson through the scriptures, and Judson just knew, like, Jesus is who he says he is. He embraced his faith. And then as the story goes, he married his first wife, and a week later, they were on a ship headed to India. So pretty radical turnaround. Judson's on his way to India, and he was actually going there to meet up with William Carey, another really famous missionary. And so William Carey is one of the most famous 19th century missionaries. And the 19th century, which is the 1800s, is the famous century of missions. And so Judson and Carey, they're some of the first that kind of paved the way for missions in that century. And so Judson goes there, and he's actually he's kicked out of India. He spends I think it was a few months that he spent there, and then he was kicked out of India. So he boarded a ship and he didn't know where he was going to go, and so they're headed back to, they weren't sure. And when they landed on the shores of Burma, which is modern day Myanmar, and Judson and his wife got off and they said, we're going to stay, that this is the place that we're going to go, and we're going to do missions, and we're going to tell the people here about Jesus. Incredible. So they stay, and it is not easy. And I'll just say too, like, Judson's wife was also brilliant. She was really instrumental in helping him translate the Bible into the Burmese language. But they faced incredible trials, and there's way too many details to get into now, but Judson spent quite a bit of time in prison. He almost died. The only reason he survived was because his first wife was, she would sneak into the jail. She would sneak supplies in to him and the people that were in there. And the reason he was in jail was because the Burmese government thought he was a spy. There was all kinds of conspiracy there. But just brutal. Like, he went through some brutal times. And all the while, he's trying to translate the Bible. He's trying to tell people about Jesus. And what really sticks out to me about Judson's life is that, and the reason he's one of my favorite missionaries, is because he doesn't actually see a lot of results or fruit from his ministry while he's alive. So he worked his butt off. Like, he did all kinds of work to translate the scriptures, and he wrote tracts in the Burmese language to tell them about Jesus, and he worked really hard at evangelism. And in his lifetime, I think he maybe saw 100 converts, and in the first few years it was minimal, almost none. And during this time, his first two wives died. There was not a lot of access to medical treatment, and so just absolutely brutal. So there's two wives that died, and he wasn't a polygamist, so he was married to the first one. When she died, he married another woman who was a missionary's wife, and her husband had died, so they got married, and they both died. And during that time, 5 of his children died as well. And there's a story of Judson where he had dug his wife's grave, and he put her body into the grave, and he sat beside the grave and he looked into it, and he wrote in his journal that he longed to be in that grave. He just longed to be dead. And he says to God in his journal, he said, God, you are to me the great unknown. I believe in you, but I find you not. So he's in this really dark, difficult, challenging season of his life. And as a missionary, somebody who had encountered God, and he went over because he was responding to God's call in his life, but he still wrestled with just difficult questions and major challenges. And that line, it actually bothers me when I think about it. You know, God, you are to me the great unknown. I believe in you, but I find you not. Like just thinking about that darkness. I don't know if you've experienced that, but I have. I've had times in my life where I've just wrestled with questions, and they feel heavy, and it's hard. It's challenging to connect with God. It's challenging sometimes to really sense and feel his presence. And Judson was just battling through depression. Like, like I said, he lost his wives and kids, but God gave him the strength to persist, to persevere, to continue. And what's incredible about Judson is that 200 years later, they still use his Bible. His translation was so good that it actually helped to shape the Burmese language. A lot of the missionaries from a couple hundred years ago that did translation work, a lot of their translations have been updated, but Judson's is still in use today. And this is incredible. And I just got to tell you this. I had an opportunity when I was at Kingswood University to actually travel to Myanmar. It was in 2016, and I heard the evangelism professor, Mike McNeil, was talking to a couple guys and telling them that he was going to be going to Myanmar. And I was actually just like in the lunchroom, and I overheard him, and I said, I want to go. And he was like, well, if you want to come, you can come. It didn't make any sense. The reason he didn't ask me was because I had so much on my plate. There was so much going on, and it didn't even make sense to go, but I was like, I've got to go. And so God provided the money, and it was really cool. I was able to go, and it was an incredible time. But while I was there in Myanmar, I had on the way there on the plane, I actually read a book about Judson because he was my favorite missionary, and I had done some reading about him in the past. But since I was going to where he had been a missionary, I wanted to be a little more up to date with his life and story, and so I was reading it on the plane. And I was in this village with this guy who only spoke Burmese, and he was a Christian, and we couldn't communicate. But I asked him. I said the name Judson. And when I said the name Judson, his eyes lit up, and he went and he grabbed his Bible and he opened his Bible and he said, Judson, Judson. And he was showing me all this Burmese text, and he remembered this person who had given his life for the sake of the Burmese people. And this is 200 years later, he was so grateful. And missiologists, they actually calculated that Judson probably saw maybe 100 people commit their lives to Jesus during his lifetime. But in the 200 years since, there's about 1 million people in Myanmar who are following Jesus because of the impact of Judson's life. Like, it's just incredible. That encourages me so deeply, because this is a man who wrestled. Like, he went through this process of deconstruction. He walked away from the faith of his childhood. And then he had an encounter with God, and he went in obedience to him, and he served. And even while serving, he went through periods of just questions and challenges and difficulties. But God gave him the strength to somehow persist. And today, there's real evidence of the impact of this guy's life. It challenged me, because I want to follow Jesus in a way where my life leads people to him. In this process, we're talking about deconstruction. There's lots, like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of people that there's various reasons they're walking away from their faith, or they're deconstructing. And what I want to encourage you with is that Jesus really is who he says he is. The fact that deconstruction is in the air. Back in 2018, a movie came out called Smallfoot. It's a kid's movie about a bunch of Yetis. They live like way up in this mountain where no human can get to. It's called Smallfoot because it's kind of the opposite of Bigfoot. It's about a human that comes to this pack of Yetis. But what's interesting is the whole movie is about deconstruction. And so if you've seen it, maybe you didn't look at it through that lens, watch it again. I actually loved the movie, even though I was grieved at kind of what I was seeing, because in the movie, there's this group of Yetis, and there's this sort of spiritual Yeti guy who his responsibility is to keep the Yetis in the dark about the larger world. And he actually is this religious figure. He even carries around, and I think it's symbolic of like Moses with the 10 Commandments and the stones. He's got all these stones that have different laws and rules, and his whole role is to keep everybody in ignorance. And so religion in this movie, truth, is painted as like repressive. And so this guy, and then there's this group of Yetis that they basically go out and they experience the truth, and they come back and they tell the community. And so the powers that be are afraid that this is going to destroy the community and it's going to be bad. But then it turns out that it's actually really, really good. And they even use, like in the movie, they even use terms like being woke. Like there's no secret like what the movie is actually about. It's about like deconstruct. Like religion is like, we don't need that anymore. It was something that was used to control people and to have power over them because of fear. But if you're woke, if you've moved on from that, like we don't need that anymore. We don't need that type of thinking. And that's a really common way of thinking in our culture right now. And as I've said, there's lots of people that are deconstructing, and there's all kinds of layers to it. But what I really want to hit on is this deconstruction of the faith in Jesus. I don't know what process you're going through. If you've been hurt by the church or hurt by the institution of the church, please don't turn your eyes off of who Jesus is. If you read the scriptures, Jesus' harshest words were directed at the institution of the church. In the Old Testament, the harshest words of the prophets are directed at the religious system, the people that were in charge of like speaking on behalf of God. And so whenever that system got corrupt, God spoke. He was angry that system was corrupt. He was angry that people were being abused. He was angry that sin was happening and things were being swept under the rug. God hates that. Jesus came. He rebuked that. He pushed back against that. And so if you're somebody who's been hurt by the church and you're sort of deconstructing, just know the scriptures are with you as far as speaking about sin and evil things that are being done in God's name. And the church should not try to sweep things under the rug or defend things that are done that are wrong or that are evil. But there are people that are just abandoning their faith in Jesus because of this process of deconstruction or because of hurts. And I just want to encourage you, Jesus really is who he says he is. He's God. He has come to reveal to us what God is like. If you wonder what God is like, look into the life of Jesus. The scriptures tell us that Jesus is the exact representation of God. He is God revealed. And he loves you. He loves you so deeply. And so I don't know what, if you've listened all the way through, a lot of times YouTube videos, people tune in for like a minute or 30 seconds. I don't know if you've listened all the way through or not. If you have, I just want to encourage you to look to Jesus and to get together with other people who are Jesus followers. I'm a pastor of a church, and so you could say that it is an institutional church, I guess. Like I'm a part of the Wesleyan denomination, and we meet on Sunday mornings, and we have a Sunday school and a nursery, and we do a sermon, and we have worship songs, and so it's an institution of the church. There's lots of hurt that's been done in the institution of the church. I don't believe it's all bad. I don't believe everybody within the context of church is absolutely corrupt. Lots of people I know, I grew up in a church that was also a homeless shelter and a drug rehab center, and I saw people that just gave their lives up for the sake of telling others about Jesus and the freedom they can experience in him. I don't believe it's all corrupt. But maybe you've had really horrible experiences. I just want to encourage you, gather with other people who love Jesus and read the scriptures together. Spend time in prayer. He really, God really is who he says he is, and he loves you. And so I hope this encourages you today. It's just something that was really on my heart and wanted to share it. And my prayer, I'm going to pray that those that watch this, that tuned in, that the Lord would speak to your heart and that you would look to and trust in him. He's good.